Major political parties often run what are known as focus groups, paying research companies to find out what voters are thinking and feeling. And they use that to shape policies, messages and win elections. They're even doing it now. So joining me live is the Director of RedBridge Group, Simon Welsh. And it's very timely, Simon. It is the first day of Parliament. It's all ceremonial today. Question time doesn't happen until later in the week. In the political landscape, what risks are there for both the major parties at the moment?
Yeah, it's fascinating at the moment, Laura. So we're seeing a real continuation of this sort of disenchantment with both major parties, and that's federal and sort of state level. We've been doing a lot of sort of work around Victorian state level stuff at the moment, sort of having a sniff around there, as it were. But this trend towards minor parties' independence still seems to be persisting, even though there might be a sort of a hypothesis that voters might have got it out of their system through the federal election, but this is persisting. And in Victoria, we're probably seeing some real risks for the Andrews government there around the Greens in some of their inner city seats.
Wow. Okay, so Daniel Andrews is a little on the fence here, a little bit shaky, and the Greens could march on some of those Labor seats, like we kind of saw the Greens take Liberal seats in Brisbane. It's that inner city vote, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, there's a couple of things happening. So the first is that in some of those inner city seats, there was a sort of a vanguard there that was always very good for Labor, which was sort of the lower income workers in insecure work that were living there because it was close to work, sharing houses and these sorts of things. Some of that cohort has left through the pandemic because they've lost jobs, they've had to move to other places for work. And when you're on pretty thin margins, it doesn't take a lot for that to have an impact. But the other thing that we're seeing is this primacy on climate change has persisted in the inner city. It's probably about the only place where cost of living doesn't routinely come up as the number one issue. It's about the only place left that doesn't happen. And so there's still this primacy on climate change. And in Victoria, for example, what they're saying to us is it's not that we don't like Labor, it's not that we don't like Daniel Andrews, but there's this sort of inherent compromise. So they sort of look at Victorian Labor and either they can't sort of identify things that they've done on climate, or they can talk about, the solar rebate, they can talk about a moratorium on gas fracking and these sorts of things as good things, but then that's balanced out by EV taxes, by building mega road projects when you should be building public transport, these sorts of things. So there's this sense of stagnation around climate. So on this issue that's so important to them, there's either no sort of great value for Labor, or there's this sense of stagnation. And so they're looking for this third option, which is sort of going back to voting patterns that we saw in sort of pre-2018, which is back looking at the Greens.
I find this fascinating that in a not insignificant cohort of people that they're talking about climate change rather than cost of living, given the environment we're in. So I'm assuming, Simon, that these are quite high income or higher income individuals or families. So it's interesting that they're looking away from the major parties, not just Labor. Of course, in Victoria, that's most relevant because that's where the Victorian government has its power. But the major parties that might traditionally vote for the major parties are looking to the Greens, not even the Teals.
That's right. And that varies on where you are. So typically in those sort of Labor-held areas, they tend to look towards Green, but not insulated from Teal-type candidates either. And in the Liberal areas, it tends to be Liberal Teal, Labor Green type contests, and there's a bit of an artefact in that of the 2018 election, which was if you're watching the demographic trends, if you're watching sort of the trends on voting patterns in some of those inner city seats in Melbourne, for example, they should have gone Green back in 2018. But the Greens at that time had some particular problems, particularly around treatment of women within the party that aren't there now. And so in some senses, it's kind of nature healing and going back to the trend that was always there. And the same rolls true for other parts, sort of those inner city, as you rightly point out, wealthier areas are starting to go back to, as I say, sort of voting patterns that we were seeing prior to the pandemic, back to those sorts of trends prevailing.
Yeah, a lot of problems, not just in the Greens with women issues. I would argue both the major parties as well, but particularly the Liberals after that result. Simon, we'll check in next week. Thanks so much.
Go on. Thanks, Laura.